Welcome to SDHC's Health and Wellbeing podcast. Before we begin, we want to emphasise that the information shared in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date content, it is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis or treatment. Always seek the guidance of your doctor or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. Remember, your health and well-being are invaluable, so prioritise consulting with a medical professional for your personalised care. Hi everybody, you're listening to the Health and Wellbeing podcast from Hillbrow Health and Wellbeing and SDHC with your host, Dr Nick Harvey. The purpose of this show is to help people understand how they can help themselves and others with their health and well-being. Every episode I interview an everyday expert to understand the latest evidence and advice on how to improve your own health or help others. Today we're diving into a topic that touches on the very heart of human connection, how brain injury and illness can change the way people communicate. Communication shapes who we are, how we relate to others, and how we make sense of the world. When that's affected, it can change everything. Our guest today is someone who's dedicated her career to improving communication and connection for people facing exactly these challenges. Dr Firle Beckley is a highly experienced speech and language therapist with over 20 years of clinical and academic work behind her. She's recently completed a PhD at University College London, funded by the Stroke Association, focused on how to best deliver communication partner training, a powerful, evidence-based approach that helps improve real-life conversations. Firle's also the co-founder of Lemonade from Lemons, a not-for-profit that supports businesses and therapists to create more inclusive communication environments. Her mission's clear: to help people rediscover the joy and connection that conversation can bring, no matter the challenges they face. Welcome, Firle.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Not at all. It's a real pleasure, and it's been lovely to catch up with you until now and hear just a bit about you. And reading this as well and listening to you before just makes me realise kind of how passionate you must be about this, because it sounds like you've been through a lot. You know, you really put a lot into your work.
Yes, I guess so. Probably, yeah. So I suppose I became a speech therapist back in 2003, which sort of feels like yesterday, but then when you realise actually it was a very long time ago. And I've been working with people who've predominantly had stroke and have communication differences as a result of that for the majority of my career. And I think meeting people who are dealing with these differences on a daily basis and working with them not only as a speech therapist, but also in research. And I've worked with people as colleagues. You really get to see the impact that these differences have on people and the fact that actually as a society, we don't know much about it.
Mm-hmm. And just before we dive into the professional side, you were telling me that you were doing a PhD a few years ago. COVID was having children. So you're juggling a hell of a lot there, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd recommend that to people. So I started my PhD in 2012, and then about a year in, I fell pregnant with Alfred, and so took some maternity leave and came back part-time. And then about a year after that, fell pregnant with Izzy. And then it was 2 babies and trying to juggle the PhD. And we moved from London to Eastbourne, and then COVID hit. So I have to say, full disclosure, the PhD did stop during COVID, but yes, it's been quite an interesting journey, and it took about 12 years to get it finished through all of that.
Wow. So you persevere.
Yeah, the perseverance. Yeah, that's a polite way of putting it.
Perseverance penguin. That's fantastic. And yet you haven't given up, because now you've formed this community interest company, so not for profit.
That's right.
That you want to continue this work with, really.
Yeah, so I feel like the area that I've studied for my PhD, communication partner training, it's a really important element of speech and language therapy. It's one of the tools that we have, but it's one of the tools that directly addresses conversation. And conversation is the thing that we all use language for the most every single day. But as speech and language therapists, we're not always that confident about how to do it. And actually, I also think that when we work with people, it's fantastic to get the person who has the communication difference skilled up and their friends and family around them. But then there's still the rest of the world. When you go outside your front door and you go to the supermarket, the bank, the health centre, you talk to the police, whoever it is, and they don't understand what some of these communication differences are. We're pretty good now with dementia. Neurodiversity is becoming more commonly understood, but talk about aphasia, dysarthria, apraxia, and often people will look quite shocked and a bit blank.
So communication partner training is about training people without problems to understand how best.
Yeah, it's about shifting the onus, shifting the focus. So often in therapy, and I think in medicine, we concentrate on the person who's had the thing happen to them, and it's about making them better. And with communication differences, sometimes you can't make someone better immediately, or sometimes people they never go back to the way they communicated before. So it's about learning to live with and supporting on that journey. And when we communicate, it's never a one-way thing. It's always talking to someone. And so the other person really matters. And so the other person needs to understand what they're doing. So in a conversation that we're having, I'm taking a turn, you're listening to me, and then you're formulating your response, and then you're going to say something back. And what I say to you influences what you then do in response to me. And that's a very fundamental part of conversation. And if we understand that, and we understand the different things we do in conversation, and then we understand the ways that communication differences can break the rules of the conversations that we have, then you can suddenly get further when it becomes difficult in terms of fixing it, or at least understanding why it's problematic and how you can try and move it on, if that makes sense.
Fascinating. So give us some examples then.
So I was doing some training with Residential Villages Group, and we were talking about the very English thing of saying, how are you? And when we say, how are you? The preferred response is, what would you say?
I'm all right.
I'm all right. Yeah,
no one wants to hear that you're not.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. That's exactly it, right? So you're not there saying, how are you? You're doing something else with that turn. And what you're actually doing is you're kind of asking someone if they're ready to have a conversation with you. And then the other person says, yeah, I'm all right. How are you? Which is kind of like, yes, I am ready to have that conversation with you. And then it starts. And I remember there was one of the Residential Villages Group ladies, she was from Poland. She said, oh my goodness, do you know how long it took me to understand what you were doing there? So she said she would always start telling people how she was, and then we'd all be like backing off, and she couldn't understand why. And so we were laughing about the cultural differences. But there are all these things that we innately follow and we don't think about it. So you ask a question, and I don't know, certainly, I definitely find it with my kids. I will ask them a question and they will ignore me. But I want an answer because a question demands an answer. And so I will pursue them asking the same question 3 or 4 times, getting increasingly annoyed that they're not following the rules. They're breaking them. I'm asking a question. You must respond. And so that's another one, for example. But often when you have a communication difference, and especially if you have something called aphasia, which is difficulty with using language, and you might have something called word finding difficulties, being put on the spot and being asked a question where you have to generate a very specific piece of vocabulary that you can't do, it's terrifying. A bit like at school, when you're asked a question, oh my God, I don't know the answer, I've pulled a blank. So there's those sorts of things. And, you might ask somebody for a request to do something, and then typically the preferred response is for someone to go, oh yeah, I'll do that for you. And if someone's going to say they're not doing it, there's often a bit of a silence whilst you work out how you're going to hedge this and make it sound a little bit nicer that you're giving the dispreferred response and saying, actually, no, I'm not going to get you the milk in, or whatever it is. But you see what I mean? There's like rules that we innately follow in conversation. It's not random.
No. So it's about building a bit more of an awareness.
Exactly. If you have the vocabulary and the awareness of how we structure conversations, then you can start to fix it. So in communication partner training, we often talk about when things go wrong. So generally somebody notices, something goes wrong, somebody notices, and somebody fixes it. And typically in conversation, just like I did then, I made a mistake. I noticed it. And I fixed it. I put the order of what I just said in the wrong order. when you have a communication difference, what might happen is that the person with the communication difference may well make a mistake. Either they notice it and they can't fix it, or they don't notice it, and then the other person comes in and fixes it. And then if you can imagine that when you're talking with someone and the other person keeps coming in and fixing what you're saying, what that does for your confidence and your sense of self and your motivation possibly to go out and keep talking, it can really dent it.
It's really, really difficult though, isn't it? I find that when I'm talking with somebody who is struggling to get their words out, do you wait and let them struggle alone? Because that seems quite mean sometimes. Or, do you help fill in? Do you want any tips there?
I mean, for some people, it's a matter of asking them, what will help you here? So for Ben, when I was asking him about his communication, he said that it's very frustrating when someone finishes your sentence for you, because often they'll get it wrong. And then you've got even more work to do to try and fix it. And it knocks you off thinking through what you're doing. Now, conversation analysis, which is a methodology used to study conversation and where some of these patterns are coming from, shows that when we're struggling to find words, there's very specific behaviours that we adopt. So we might be like, and you drop eye contact with the person you're talking to. So typically people look up or they look down, or, but you're not making eye contact anymore. And then when you do want the person to come in and help you, you'll often re-establish eye contact and you'll say something like, or come on. And then you've got that invite to get involved. So sometimes it's about watching what that person's doing and seeing if they're in the middle of trying to retrieve something and they're busy, maybe don't. Maybe give them a minute. If they get lost and they lost their train of thought, classically, what I will do is just recap where they've got to. Say, okay, you've said this and you've said this, and I might write it down or draw it so that it's there, it's physically there. Because often when you're struggling, the words come out and then they're gone and you've got nothing to latch onto. But if you can see it in front of you, it removes some of that processing effort, and then you can concentrate more on the bit that you haven't got across yet.
And just listening to you talking about writing, because that's relevant here too, isn't it? Because I guess some people's communication problems, they could write perfectly well and that would be a solution, and some people just wouldn't.
Yes. So in terms of the different types of communication differences after brain injury or illness, there are motor speech difficulties. So that might be where the motor cortex or the premotor cortex, like a strip in your brain that controls the movements of your body, has become damaged, or the neural pathways to the muscles involved in your speaking have had some sort of have been damaged. So it might be to your lungs, your voice box, your larynx, to your lips, your tongue, and it can change the physical way you produce speech. So there's something called dysarthria, which is a weakness of your muscles. So you might sound a bit slurred, or sometimes people can speak too quickly or quietly. There's also something called apraxia, where you lose the ability to automatically produce speech. So you start groping. And Chris Kamara, have you heard of him, the football pundit?
Oh, yeah.
He used to speak at 100 miles an hour. Hilarious. He has apraxia of speech now. And you can just see he's lost that fluency and everything is more effortful. But the other one is aphasia, which is when areas of your brain that look after your language can become damaged, typically after stroke, but it can happen after a brain injury. There are now recognised frontotemporal dementias, which can impact on your language, like Bruce Willis. And language includes not only your speech, but your writing, your reading, your understanding of words. And so, yes, and the way that aphasia affects everybody is different, because the way we all store our words, the vocabulary we have, is different. So to get back what you were originally saying, yes, you can have somebody who can no longer write, or you can write a little bit, or you can understand pretty well, but speaking is difficult, or your understanding is pretty poor, but you've got some fluent speech. It's a real difficult one to pin down.
And so to everybody, what I'm hearing is it's highly individual as to the impact on their day-to-day life, their relationships, and I guess their sense of self.
Yeah, I feel like I'm speaking for people here, and I apologise for that, but we are how we communicate, and we're a society that is for whatever reason, heavily biased towards verbal communication. And as soon as that is impacted in any way, it can very much change the way that people perceive you, and it changes the way that you perceive yourself. A lot of your identity is tied up in how you sound and how you tell people your thoughts, your feelings, your ideas. And if all of a sudden that is changed, that can be extremely challenging. And I think that's one of the things that maybe a lot of us overlook when you're thinking about the impact of, communication differences. It's that side of things, and that constant. So a chap I worked with, who's founder of Say Aphasia, actually, Colin, I said to him once, it must always be in the back of your mind, because he has aphasia. And he's like, no, front, always front, because everything you do has to go through that language filter for you to be able to function as a member of society. And I suppose I'd say to people, have a think about the ways in which you've used language up to now today. Like, is there any activity you've done that has not involved your language skills at any point? I suspect the answer might be no. It's literally everywhere.
Yeah. And we've touched on some conditions that are really obvious, but I guess there's more subtle ones as well that, we wouldn't notice so much. So a lot of these things can be quite mild. So with aphasia, you can have a very severe aphasia where you can't understand any words anymore. But you can also have mild aphasia where it's just in very stressful situations, or when you're tired, that your words start to fail you a little bit, or you start to misunderstand. And that's the same with the motor speech difficulties. You might be absolutely fine until it's the end of the day, or if you have to give a presentation, and then all of a sudden just the very slightest slur in your speech, and it can be devastating for people. There's also cognitive communication difficulties. So that's not a problem with language, but it's a difficulty with, or a difference in how you use your language, because often the frontal lobes of your brain, which have a lot of your stop buttons and your ability to modulate your behaviour, get impacted. So although you're speaking fine, you're breaking the rules of conversation in a different way. You're either dominating the conversation and talking about topics that are only of interest to you, or you can become completely passive, or people sometimes find that they get angry quite quickly. And it's not always obviously a communication thing, because the speech and the language are okay, but you're just different. Or it's not how it was. So those are some of the things that can sometimes, be slightly more subtle in the way that they present.
Thank you. It's been really insightful to start to think about how I can modulate and just almost be aware of how I'm communicating. And I think quite rightly we've dived in on that side. But just to flip to the other side, if there's somebody who's feeling really kind of frustrated and isolated because they're struggling to communicate, what advice do you have for them?
So the advice, as I asked, one of my directors of Lemonade from Lemon, Ben, he lives with aphasia, and I said to him, what advice would you have? And interestingly, his advice was about the people around that person, and about taking the time to establish and have conversations with that person, and making sure that they're able to get their thoughts and their feelings across. And I thought that's quite interesting, because that's very much about those feelings of autonomy. And then I was thinking to myself about that with people of just take one day, one conversation at a time. There are places out there that you can go to for support. There are charities like Say Aphasia, Parkinson's UK have groups running in Eastbourne, and there's Headway Sussex for people. And don't give up. So there's often a misconception that when you've had some sort of brain injury, there's a 6-month window of recovery and then everything solidifies. But research shows that's not the case, and changes carry on in your brain for over 20 years after a stroke, for example. And it's about just trying to get out there and adopt strategies that can help you, but having that, what we call a rope team, but the people around you who can really support you in what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you. So we've talked about the people with difficulties in communicating, people around them. What about more broadly still in communities, and what can organisations and communities do?
One of the things we're trying to do with Lemonade from Lemons is raise awareness of communication, inclusivity. And the fact that we're really good at this well, I say we're really good. We are far more aware of the physical barriers that people experience in terms of accessing services, but we don't think about the communication barriers that are in place and the things that we need to do to be able to remove those. And they're not high cost changes. They're simple things that people can do to make a massive difference. So one of the things that is about training for your staff, becoming aware of what communication differences are, and then also giving your organisation the time to train staff in how to communicate with people, and also to make little changes in your environment in terms of quiet spaces, or thinking about how your leaflets are designed so that maybe there is slightly less text, or the font that you're using is accessible, or there are pictures next to some of the words that you're using. And that's part of what we're doing with Lemonade from Lemons, is inclusive conversation training to raise awareness and to skill up people, so that just like you can get out a ramp to allow someone through the door who is maybe on wheels, we have ramps there so that if someone comes in and you're talking to them and you think, oh, I don't think they're understanding what I'm saying, or this is getting tricky, you can get out a pen, a paper, you can get out some supports there to allow you to have a conversation that doesn't just rely on speaking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Fascinating. And you also mentioned before we came on air, it's things I hadn't even thought of. Video screens are everywhere, aren't they? They change too quickly for people. Yeah.
So often what can happen with a communication difference, especially if it involves your language or your thinking skills, is that your ability to read something and think it through and find the meaning slows down. And also some people use written words to cue in their speech. So if you've got a sign up and it keeps flicking as like a menu in a coffee shop, then you might have found what it is that you want to order. And then when the screen changes, your support has suddenly vanished and you're stood in front of someone and you can't communicate what it is that you want to purchase. And there's no other support there to help you with it. And a simple thing there would be a paper menu, or, a menu that doesn't do that so that people can use the supports that are around to help them communicate to the best of their abilities.
How big is this problem? So, because I guess we all have observed people who are overtly struggling with communication, but actually that's potentially the tip of the iceberg, isn't it, when we're talking about the broader problem? So what sort of numbers of people do you think in our community?
So, the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists have said that 1 in 5 of us will experience a communication difficulty at some point in our lives. And obviously that can range from childhood, developmental difficulties, through to the stuff that I'm talking about in adulthood, where your difference has happened because something has happened to you. In terms of aphasia, the numbers are that 350,000 people in the UK have aphasia. And to put that into perspective, that is more than the number of people in England living with Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis and motor neuron disease combined, if you look at the figures. But research has shown that only 5% of the UK public have heard of the word and know what it means. So even if you do manage to say it, and it's an incredibly awkward word to say, the chances are that the person you've managed to communicate that to won't know what it means anyway. And then it's difficult to shout about it because it's a difficulty with using language. And then I think there was also a piece of research recently that showed that 64% of people on acute stroke wards will end up with a communication difference, at least at that acute stage. And it's typically thought that a third of people with stroke will have a communication difference, and about 70% of people who've had traumatic brain injury will have a communication difference as a result. So it's not small. It's not small.
It's huge. And as you said, because they have difficulty communicating, you're not going to hear it. So it's the person who's quiet. Right?
Exactly. That's the thing. And I remember talking to another chap, and he was lovely, and he said, he'd go to the pub with his friends, and the conversation would move on and he couldn't interject. And then when he got the words that he wanted to interject with, it was a different topic. So he said to me, end up people watching. So he just sits back and he watches what everybody's doing. And that's the reality a lot of the time with what happens, unless we, as the people around that person, adapt and recognise that, it's very difficult.
Yeah. So I've been listening out to try and think about what my take-home messages are, and I try and guess what's in your mind. So I've taken home one really interesting point actually about the eye contact. That's probably not a take-home message in general, but that's been really useful to think that actually when somebody, and I'm doing it now, is not looking you in the eye, be quiet and listen, because they're deep in thought. That's a really useful tip for me. So.
Oh, good. I'm really pleased.
And more broadly, I think it's probably be aware that, what did you say? 1 in 5 people at some point in their life have a communication difficulty. So it's so common that we should be positively looking out for it all the time and thinking, how can I, communicate in a way that will help if I'm talking with somebody.
Absolutely. I mean, good conversation is all of our responsibility, and that's really important. And the conversation is the way that we all bond with each other. So if you imagine losing that and the impact that can have on someone, it's devastating. And, I think we all need a bit of knowledge about what communication differences are, and just some basic things to understand. Like you said, if someone's looking away, they may be thinking, and let them think and let them invite you in when they want you to help them, and just give people time. There are pauses in conversation, and none of us are very comfortable with silence, but it's okay. And actually it helps to let that silence sit there and let that person either process what you've said and or think about what they're trying to communicate back. And another thing I suppose I'd say about tips is, rather than saying to someone, if you don't understand, I didn't understand that, what? Be more specific. So summarize back what you have understood from what they've said. So I think am I right? You've said this. And then it gives that person more knowledge about what they have got across, and they can then work on the bit that you haven't understood yet. And if you can top that off by maybe writing it as well, or doing a picture to support it, that would make me happy. But those changes will make a huge difference, and they don't cost any money. They're just about knowledge and practice and the confidence to do it.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to take you up on another offer. You haven't even offered, actually. But we're thinking about signage in Hillbrow, so I'm going to nab you and think about that, because I think it's really important, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be great.
And so I guess as organisations, it seems like such a simple thing, like just whack a sign up, but actually think it through and get the advice of someone like yourself.
Yeah, definitely. That would be amazing.
I'm dying to understand why lemonade from lemons.
So the theory was that communication differences are a lemon that we don't talk about very much. And actually, we can all turn that into lemonade by changing what we do as a society. So that was the underlying premise behind that one.
It's always very hard coming up with names, isn't
it? And just also trying to be a bit playful. Yeah. And make it, a little bit more catchy.
Fantastic. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been really fascinating to dig a little deeper and understand how we, as individuals, organisations and communities, can really be on the lookout for people who I think we can help in their communication a lot more, can't we?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
That's a pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Health and Wellbeing podcast, where today's focus was on communication differences after brain injury and illness, how they impact identity, relationships and well-being, and what can be done to foster better conversations and connections, with Firle Beckley and me, Dr Nick Harvey. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, please email us at sdhc.feedback@nhs.net. Please take a moment to subscribe to help support us in empowering others with their health and well-being.